Somewhere over the Aegean Sea on September 9, 1943, a German Dornier Do 217 bomber banked gently towards its target. On the flight deck of the Italian hospital ship Roma, medical staff watched the sky with increasing concern. The vessel, having just switched allegiance from Mussolini to the Allies, was steaming away from Italian ports when the German pilot locked onto his prey. What happened next was unprecedented. The aircraft released its payload, but this was no conventional bomb. This was the Ruhrstahl Fritz X, a guided bomb with small delta wings and a radio-controlled guidance system, trailing wires behind it as it descended through the afternoon air. A German officer in the bomber's cabin, watching through a telescopic sight, manipulated a joystick. The bomb obeyed his commands, banking left, then right, adjusting its angle of descent in response to distant fingers working controls in the cockpit. Within moments, the Roma erupted. The guided bomb had found its mark with devastating precision, and, for the first time in human history, a weapon had sought out its target with the active guidance of an operator flying hundreds of meters away. The Roma sank within hours, taking with her 1,352 men. This was not a suicide weapon in the manner of Japanese kamikazes, where pilot and machine merged into a single instrument of death. This was something altogether different. A weapon so advanced, so radical, so desperately innovative that it represented Germany's final gamble in an increasingly hopeless war. It was the future of warfare arriving too late to save the Third Reich. By the autumn of 1943, Germany's military situation had deteriorated catastrophically. The Soviet Union had not collapsed as Hitler had promised, but instead had absorbed everything the Wehrmacht could throw at it and emerged stronger. In North Africa, the Axis forces had been routed entirely. In Italy, the erstwhile ally had not only surrendered, but was now fighting alongside the Allies. Worst of all, the strategic bombing campaign waged by the RAF and the USAAF was intensifying beyond all previous scale. In July 1943 alone, Operation Gomorrah, the firebombing of Hamburg, killed an estimated 40,000 people and rendered three-quarters of the city homeless. The Luftwaffe, once the master of European skies, found itself increasingly unable to protect even German cities from enemy bombers. The German aircraft industry was producing fighters in unprecedented numbers, yet still the bombers got through. It was in this context of desperation and technological ambition that Germany's military leadership began to seriously entertain radical solutions. The conventional defense against enemy bombers, faster fighters, more flak guns, was failing. Production could not keep pace with losses. Pilot training had deteriorated as experienced men fell in combat and were replaced by increasingly inexperienced youths. What Germany needed was something revolutionary, something that could strike at enemy formations from distances that made interception impossible, something that could be guided to its target without relying on the skills of increasingly rare experienced pilots. The engineers and scientists who had already given Germany the world's first jet aircraft, the Me-262, and the first true ballistic missile, the V-2, now turned their attention to creating guided weapons that would reverse the deteriorating tactical situation. It was an impossible dream, and yet they pursued it with characteristic German thoroughness and innovation. Three major projects emerged from this desperation: guided bombs that could be controlled by an operator, an air-to-air missile that could destroy enemy bombers before they reached German airspace, and an experimental manned interceptor powered by a rocket engine that could climb to bombing altitude in mere minutes. Each represented a different answer to the same question: how could Germany turn back an enemy that seemed, in the conventional sense, unbeatable? The technical breakthroughs that made these weapons possible emerged from two parallel lines of German research. The first was in remote control and guidance systems. As early as the 1930s, German engineers had experimented with radio-controlled aircraft and boats. This technology, seemingly esoteric, suddenly became militarily relevant once it became clear that conventional means of air defense were failing. The second breakthrough came from materials science and aeronautical engineering. German researchers had discovered that by adding small delta wings to conventional bombs and equipping them with control surfaces that could be moved by radio signals, a falling bomb could be transformed into a guided projectile. The signals would be transmitted from the parent aircraft via trailing wires, kept aloft by small parachutes that deployed behind the bomb as it fell. The Ruhrstahl Fritz X represented the culmination of this research. The weapon itself was deceptively simple in appearance, a conventional bomb of approximately 350 kilograms, to which had been attached a set of diamond-shaped wings, a vertical tail fin, and 4 small control surfaces that could move independently. The bomb's length from nose to tail was roughly 2 meters. What made it revolutionary was not its appearance, but its principle of operation. The bomb would be released from a Do-217, and as it fell, its wings would generate lift, slowing its descent. From the aircraft, which would maintain position at a safe distance, an operator using a joystick and a telescopic sight would observe the bomb's descent and send radio signals through 2 trailing wires that unreeled behind the weapon. These signals, traveling at the speed of electricity through the wires, would activate electromagnetic relays in the bomb's tail section. These relays would move the control surfaces, the equivalent of an aircraft's rudder and elevator, to bank the bomb left or right, or to adjust its angle of descent. To an observer on the ground, watching the sky, the bomb would seem to possess an eerie intelligence, weaving through the air as if guided by some invisible hand. The HS-293, developed in parallel by Henschel, operated on slightly different principles but achieved similar results. Rather than trailing wires, the HS-293 used a sophisticated radio guidance system that was, for its time, remarkably advanced. The weapon incorporated a liquid-fueled rocket motor that would propel it forward at a speed of approximately 600 kilometers per hour, far faster than a conventional bomb and thus far harder to evade. An operator in the parent aircraft would guide the weapon using a joystick linked to a radio transmitter whilst watching the weapon's flight through a periscope that could be elevated to give a clear view of the projectile against the sky. The technology represented a quantum leap beyond conventional bombing and suggested, to German military planners, a way to defeat the enemy air superiority that was slowly strangling the Reich. Complementing these guided bombs was the Ruhrstahl X-4, the world's first air-to-air guided missile. Here again, the principle was elegantly simple, though its realization demanded extraordinary engineering. The X-4 was a small weapon, measuring just under 2 meters in length and weighing approximately 60 kilograms. It was powered by a solid-fuel rocket motor, its relatively short burn time sufficient to accelerate the weapon to a speed of approximately 650 kilometers per hour. Like the Fritz X, it utilized trailing wire guidance, with the operator in an interceptor aircraft controlling its flight via a joystick. The weapon carried a warhead of approximately 10 kilograms of explosive, equipped with a proximity fuse that would detonate the charge when the weapon passed near its target. The range was estimated at between 4 and 6 kilometers, a distance that would allow a German interceptor to attack enemy bombers before those bombers could release their own bombs over German cities. These weapons represented decades of technological progress compressed into a matter of months. Yet producing them, and manufacturing them in sufficient numbers to make a strategic difference, proved far more difficult than designing them. The Fritz X entered service first, with small numbers attached to a dedicated unit of the Luftwaffe. Between September 1943 and the war's end, approximately 1,000 Fritz X weapons were manufactured. The HS-293, though more technically ambitious, suffered from reliability problems and manufacturing delays. Only approximately 1,100 examples were produced. The X-4 missile, despite successful tests, never entered mass production before German industry collapsed. The factories that might have produced these weapons in large numbers were, by 1944, themselves under constant bombardment from Allied air raids. The very bombers that these weapons had been designed to defeat were, in a cruel irony, preventing their manufacture. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The operational history of these weapons, while significant, remains far more limited than either German planners or modern analysts might assume. The Fritz X achieved its most famous success against the Roma in September 1943, but it subsequently struck several other Allied vessels, including the British cruiser Uganda and the United States cruiser Savannah. The attacks were shocking in their precision. The weapons did not, in the manner of conventional bombing, shower an area with explosives in hope of striking something important. Instead, they struck with deadly accuracy, a single bomb often proving sufficient to cripple or sink a substantial warship. Against shipping, the Fritz X proved genuinely formidable. Yet, there is another sense in which these weapons proved historically significant. They represented the threshold of a new era in warfare. Future conflicts would not be decided by massed fighter formations dueling at close range, but by guided weapons delivering their payloads from distances at which visual contact was unnecessary. The future belonged to the air-to-air missile, to the guided bomb, to the notion that weapons could be imbued with a form of artificial intelligence that permitted them to seek out their targets with increasing autonomy. Germany had recognized this future and had attempted to seize it in desperation. That the attempt failed does not diminish the significance of the attempt itself. When the Allies began, in the immediate post-war period, to reverse engineer the Fritz X and the X-4, and when Soviet researchers obtained examples of German guided weapons technology, they understood that they were looking at the future. The weapons had been perfected by a nation in terminal decline. After the war, they would be perfected further by nations with the resources and the time to develop them properly. The legacy of these weapons programs can be traced through the guided weapons of the Cold War and beyond. The American air-to-air missiles that would be employed in Korea, Vietnam, and subsequent conflicts evolved directly from German research and German captured weapons. The guided bombs that would eventually become precision weapons of the modern age were conceptually descended from the Fritz X. The Soviet Union, which captured German weapons scientists and German research, incorporated these advances into their own weapons programs. In this sense, Germany's desperation had accelerated the evolution of warfare in ways that would resonate for decades. The weapons had failed to save the Reich, but they had succeeded in changing the nature of war itself. Today, fragments of these weapons programs survive. The Bochum BA-349 has been preserved and can be seen in aviation museums. Examples of the Fritz X and HS-293 can be found in archives and collections. The X-4 missile exists only in photographs and in the memories of engineers who worked on it. These objects serve as reminders not of German genius, but of the peculiar intersection of technological ambition and military desperation. They represent what was achieved when a nation with centuries of engineering expertise and decades of military development suddenly found itself fighting for survival. They are monuments, in other words, not to victory, but to the extraordinary lengths to which a defeated power will go in pursuit of redemption. The story of these weapons is often framed as a narrative of missed opportunity. Had Germany possessed the industrial capacity, or the time, or both, to produce these weapons in the thousands rather than the hundreds, might the course of the war have altered? Might the Allies have been forced to reduce their bombing campaign or to accept higher casualties? These questions are ultimately unanswerable, but they carry a weight. The Fritz X, hitting the Roma with such terrible precision, suggested the outlines of a different war, one in which technology rather than industrial capacity might have decided the outcome. Yet this alternative history never came to pass. What Germany possessed in innovation, it lacked in production. What it lacked in time, it could not compensate for with desperation. The weapons that never were, the thousands of Fritz X bombs that might have sunk enemy vessels, the X-4 missiles that might have ravaged bombing formations, the Natter interceptors that might have filled German skies in defensive swarms, remained locked in German factory plans and in the calculations of engineers who saw clearly what might be achieved but lacked the means to achieve it. These weapons represent the technological frontier of a war's final phase, innovations born not from confidence, but from the urgent knowledge that conventional means of defense had failed utterly. They reached toward a future of guided precision, but that future would have to wait. It would be realized after the war by the victor, by the nations that had defeated Germany, by the countries that would inherit both its weapons and its insights into the nature of modern warfare. The suicide weapons that Germany created were not manned aircraft hurling themselves at their targets in the manner of Japanese kamikazes. They were instead something altogether different, unmanned machines imbued with a form of artificial guidance, seeking out their targets with a precision that human pilots could not match. They were the future arriving in the sunset of the Third Reich, too late to save it, but not too late to shape the wars that would follow.